The Democratic Alliance is running a very bad campaign, and it's going to cost them dearly in these elections. I'm convinced that they are not going to get anywhere close to 20%. There are 6 things that the Democratic Alliance is doing wrong in this election. Number 1, they have an uninspiring leader. Number 2, they are scoring on goals left, right, and center. Number 3, they have a representation and diversity problem. Number 4, their strategic shift to the right and their unpopular policies have not created the outcomes that they thought they would create. Number 5, the moonshot what did not work. And number 6, they have a critical problem solution gap in their analysis of the problems in South Africa. Let's start with own goals, because by now you should have or you would have seen the poorly thought out campaign advert from the Democratic Alliance. Have you seen this?
In this election, for the first time in 30 years, the ANC will lose its majority, but they will do anything to stay in power. Imagine a coalition between the ANC, the violent EFF, and the Zuma faction. Under this coalition of corruption, life will only get worse.
The burning of the flag, even if done symbolically, it's offensive, it's unpatriotic, and its symbolism has very dark undertones. So the Democratic Alliance now is saying, well, we didn't burn an actual flag. It's just a video. It's just a depiction. But this was so poorly thought out. It's an example of a party that is out of touch with the voters of South Africa, with the emotions of those voters. You don't have to, as a political campaign strategy, choose something that will alienate the voters that you are pursuing, particularly when you are in trouble yourself as a political party. One of the underperforming political parties in the 2021 local government elections was the Democratic Alliance. They didn't do well and they lost a significant voter share. So for you to pick an advert like this, where you know that you're going to offend patriotic South Africans by burning the flag, that's something that I think they didn't think clearly and did not think thoroughly about. Look at how this is performing on their own platform. 2.6 million views. That seems positive at first value. But when you think it further, or when you look at the numbers further, the number of quotes there versus retweets is almost 1:5, meaning that more people disagree and are airing their disagreement towards their own audiences, and the agreement is not coming from the DA side. More people are disagreeing, more people are offended. The number of likes is very low for a video with 2.6 million views, showing you that this video has actually been something that has offended people, that has put people in the wrong side of the party. At a critical moment, right now, we are 21 days away from the election, 3 weeks. For a political party to be scoring these kind of own goals is just unconscionable. But I mean, they've chosen it. This is just poor strategy. And it's not the first time that the Democratic Alliance has had a bad moment at a critical time, scored an own goal. Do you remember this?
The biggest risk to continued progress, to continued opportunity and building a better future for all of us in this province is complacency and mercenary parties like the PA, like Rise Mzansi, like Good and like the NCC. Because they're not interested in taking on the ANC. Why aren't they campaigning in Limpopo and the Northwest Province? Why are they coming to the Western Cape? Why are they coming here to try and unseat the only government that created 300,000 jobs last year? Why are they coming here to the only government that arrested through its LEAP program over 27,000 criminals in the last year? Why are they coming here to an economy that's working, with schools that work, that give opportunities for more people, with public transport systems that work? Why here? Why not they focusing their attention on the real enemy of progress in South Africa, which is the ANC. And I've thought about this, and I'm going to tell you why. I'm going to tell you why. It's because they know that there's nothing left to loot in the other 8 provinces. Alles is opgeëet. Daar's net geld hier in die Weskaap. The rest of the country is bankrupt. That's why they want to come to the Western Cape, because they want to get their hands on the budget and the money that's been well looked after. And let me tell you, if they get that right, it's going to be the biggest bank heist you've ever seen.
Now think about this moment, and this was also one of the moments which did poorly for the Democratic Alliance. 2.7 million people viewed this clip on the Newsroom Africa platform. 1,000 quotes and only 329 reposts. This shows you on a platform like Twitter that most people are disagreeing and offended by what you're saying. And first and foremost, it was not true, and it's not true, that new political parties such as Rise Mzansi, Build One South Africa, and all the others that are competing are not interested in the ANC. They're very critical, in fact, of the ANC, and they've articulated their criticisms of corruption in the ANC, mismanagement by the ANC, and many other issues around the leadership of the ANC. They've done that. And he then says, why are they not contesting in other provinces? They are. They're running national elections. You have to contest in all of the provinces in order for you to really be running a national election. They're running in those provinces in their provincial capacities. They have premier candidates. So it's not true that they're just running in the Western Cape. And then the other issue is this idea that the opposition shouldn't be challenged by other opposition, as if the DA has an exclusive right to running the Western Cape. That sounds entitled. It doesn't sound like the behavior of somebody who believes in competition and believes that competition is good for innovation, that competition is good for improvement of services to the end consumer, who in this case is the voter. So for John Steenhuisen to insist that, nobody should be challenging the Democratic Alliance in the Western Cape was wrong. It also ignored the fact that many people are concerned about the discrepancies in services between places like Sea Point and Greenpoint and places like Khayelitsha, Gugulethu, the Cape Flats, Nomzamo, where the quality of services are often far worse than they would be in many parts of South Africa, even though they're supposed to be in this great and excellently run province. That's the reality. That's the reality. So if there are political parties that say to people who are black and brown and live in communities where they are marginalized, where they're still suffering from crime, that we think we've got a better proposition for you, be that the Patriotic Alliance, be that Good, be that Build One South Africa or Rise Mzansi, that should be welcomed. That is part of what competition is about. Then there's this idea that the people who are contesting and coming to contest in the Western Cape are coming to steal. This is fear-mongering. This is fear-mongering. People like Songezo Zibi do not have any accusations of being corrupt. They are people who've run, business publications successfully. There are many people on his team who've been working in business, working in other sectors of society, who come with high repute. So the idea that they're coming to steal and to heist, that is fear-mongering. And that in and of itself is an example of an own goal scored by the Democratic Alliance, because the attention that came from that was negative. So if you look at this flag burning advert, you create an unpatriotic moment, you create an offensive moment, you create a perception that you are actually standing against the existence of South Africa. And by the way, that is something that is happening in the right-wing circles of the Western Cape right now. There are people who want to secede from South Africa. They want to burn the flag and separate from South Africa. So for you to make an advert burning a flag, you are blowing a dog whistle to those people to actually say that you share sentiments with them and that you too have an ideology and a view that you should actually be pulling away from what South Africa is and what it represents, right? So people did not take away from that video the message that they thought they were giving, or maybe people did take away the message that they thought they were giving. In any event, this is not the kind of thing that you want to be doing as a party that is seeking to be the leading opposition to create a coalition. And by the way, even the attack of the other opposition parties, how are you going to build a coalition? Aren't you trying to run the country? Aren't you trying to get to a position where you can come together with other like-minded people to run a coalition? But at the point at which you don't even think that they should be competing, how are you going to then go back to them and create a relationship to create a governing coalition? All of these things are own goals. They're unnecessary. The DA didn't have to do any of this. That's the point. And this is part of why they're having a bad election. Now, this is not the only time that they've made this kind of a mistake. Do you remember what happened in 2021 when they made that advert saying that we call you heroes? And then that related to vigilantes. If you recall, when the protests and the looting broke out, people came together. Some of them were acting in good faith, trying to make sure that looting wouldn't affect their businesses and looting wouldn't disrupt certain services that they needed access to. But others acted in racist ways. They started chasing people away from supermarkets on the basis of skin color. That happened. And others went further. In Phoenix, they committed atrocities. They unalived people. People lost their lives as a result of what they did. And the Democratic Alliance made posters saying, "You are heroes," to people such as those people. They were part of the vigilantes. And it was such an offensive advert. It was such an advert which seemed to be a praise of unlawful acts which were deliberately targeted at certain people, and those people were black. That's what that came across as. Think about it. It's an own goal. So what's happened with this particular flag burning advert, what's happened with the attacks of the small parties, these are all deliberate own goals by the Democratic Alliance. But not only have they been scoring own goals, their leadership has been uninspiring. Typically, you want to go into an election, a critical election such as this, with a leader who's likable, who's inspiring, who's able to rouse the passions of people across the political spectrum. This is what Barack Obama was able to do, to get people from different sectors of America to believe in his vision, to look beyond the fact that he had this Muslim name and was black, and to vote for him. That's what happened. He brought a coalition of Americans together who typically would not have supported him, and that's what gave him the victory. Do you know of any quotables by John Steenhuisen that inspire you? What speech of his has inspired you recently? That's the issue. If you're trying to overthrow Cyril Ramaphosa, to beat him, you have to have an inspiring leader at the top of the ticket. Unfortunately, John Steenhuisen is not that inspiring leader. And in fact, sometimes he has said things that have made him more unlikable, like when he called the mother of his children, his ex-wife, roadkill. That put off a lot of people. It was a strategic mistake. It was an own goal. And when he continues to take charge and to participate in these kind of discussions that he has been participating in, it undercuts his likability, because on the day, people are going to look at your party name, look at the face, and say, no. That's why you need likability. It's important, and the Democratic Alliance has not delivered that right now. Right? Number 3, they have a representation problem. There has been an exodus of black leaders, Mmusi Maimane, Herman Mashaba, John Moodley, Bongani Baloyi, and the list goes on, Phumzile Van Dam, Mbalini Ntuli. The list goes on and on and on. All of these people leaving your party, and all of them saying that it is not a welcoming space for black and brown bodies. Going to Action SA, going to these other political parties. And even this weekend in the City Press, there was an article talking about the same thing. Now, they obviously will have pushback and say, no, each and every individual case is different. But there's a clear pattern here. And this perception now exists amongst the electorate, but they didn't try to unravel this perception. They didn't try to confront this perception, right? By actually aggressively showing that they want inclusivity. They just continued with business as usual. And this thing is going to come and hurt them because the majority of the voters in South Africa are black people. If they view your party not to respect black people, not to embrace black people, not to value black people, why would they choose your political party when there are so many alternatives on the ballot? 56. That's a real issue. The other one that they've done is that they've shifted in the last 4 or 5 years to the right, and they've chosen unpopular policies and policies that seem to be attacking social redress and justice for black people. For instance, when they're talking about scrapping the minimum wage, that's a policy that can only lead to the further exploitation of the most vulnerable workers. Because what's likely to happen is that cruel, bad bosses are going to actually just try to pay the lowest amount that they can for the maximum amount of labor. And that's not necessarily going to lead to an improvement in the conditions of living for those particular people. All that's going to do is to take the South African labor market back to the early 1900s. The reason why we have labor protection laws is because we saw what was happening in the United Kingdom. We saw what was happening in America, in the factories. People were being abused, forced to work long, extreme hours for minimal or no pay. That's why unions were created. Not to say that unions are perfect, but the idea of scrapping the minimum wage is one that is particularly not going to lead to positive outcomes. They want to scrap the Employment Equity Act. They want to scrap broad-based black economic empowerment. They want to scrap preferential procurement acts, which require companies to work with other black companies. These acts are not perfect. I actually think that the ANC has not done a great job in the implementation of these acts. But understand that affirmative action policies exist because there are still massive discrepancies in employment trends at particular sectors, especially as you get to the professional jobs, the managerial jobs, and the executive jobs. There are still massive discrepancies in South Africa at those levels, not because there are no qualifications amongst the population, but because some of the employers are still being preferential in picking people who look like them, sound like them, and go to the spaces and places where they hang out. That is still what's happening. There's a big discrepancy. So you do not solve for injustice that was designed on the basis of race by ignoring race. You do not do that. And you do not solve for those issues by denying that the injustice exists. And what they'll say is that, no, we want to actually, scrap these things and just measure SDGs, sustainable development goals. Do you know that a company can improve a sustainable development goal without necessarily changing or giving opportunities to the people who've been marginalized historically in South Africa? Do they understand that? These policies and more, the focus on some of the issues that they've spent a lot of time have been to try to get the right wing of their party back, because there's a perception that those people voted for Freedom Front Plus. But in so doing, they've alienated a lot of black people who thought, maybe I could vote for the DA. Maybe I could give them a chance. But these policy choices are part of the reason why the Democratic Alliance is having a bad campaign. The other thing that I wanted to speak on is that this moonshot idea didn't work. It didn't land because they were not able to maintain and create the positive relationships that they needed to be able to take things where this would be a viable contender. They wanted to create this broad coalition that would then become like the movement for democratic change in Zimbabwe, but they failed to do that. And part of the reason why they failed to do that is because the leadership of the Democratic Alliance did not have the emotional intelligence and the diplomatic intelligence to bring everyone into the room and to create a platform where people would feel safe, comfortable, and represented enough to join them in doing this particular project. Finally, there's a problem-solution gap in what the Democratic Alliance has elected to do. They've said that the problem that they've identified is that there's corruption, cadre deployment, and criminality. And that if they deal with those things, then they will be able to rescue South Africa. However, they've ignored another big problem and the cause of that big problem: inequality. South Africa is the most unequal country in the world. And the reason why that inequality exists is because of the extractive economy. How divided or how unequal is South Africa? This is known. Let's just watch a clip and then you'll get to see.
But according to the World Bank, South Africa is one of the most unequal countries in the world. Roughly 10% of its population holds around 70% of the wealth. And race is still a major factor in that division.
This strip in Cape Town, South Africa, divides the beachside community of Strand from the township of Nomzamo. They're only a few meters apart, but the people on each side live very different lives. Strand has backyards and driveways. Nomzamo is much more dense, and the people here have fewer basic services. Less piped water, less internet access, and Nomzamo is majority black, while the area across the line is majority white. If we use dots on a map to represent race, you can see how stark that divide is. If we zoom out to the whole city, we can see it's actually everywhere. And this is the case across much of South Africa. The color of your skin here often determines where you live. It also determines your quality of life. This map shows where jobs and opportunities are primarily concentrated in Cape Town. And this is where most of the city's black people live, in informal settlements called townships on the city's periphery.
People have to move by public transport for up to 3 hours a day, and they can't take care of their obligations in the community with the rest of the family because they're always working and they're always traveling.
So that's clear. 10% of the population controlling 70%, 80% of the wealth of the nation. That is highly unequal. And considering that some of these issues that we are still seeing in terms of land ownership, in terms of housing, are as a result of minority domination for over 100 years, the Land Act of 1913, the Bantu Areas Act, and all of the things that happened to push black people to the peripheries of the country, to the peripheries of the economy. Those things are not being fixed by the Democratic Alliance. And further, and pursuant to what I'm saying, is they don't discuss the nature of the extractive market as it exists right now. The South African economy is not an inclusive economy. It is an extractive economy where the economic institutions are concentrated and the power of those economic institutions are concentrated in a few hands. The South African market is such that it is an oligopoly market where you've got a few big banks, a few big insurance companies, a few big construction companies. There is not easy access to the market for competitors and for new entrants. And that is not by accident. It is by design. And if you want to fix the South African economy, if you want to create economic growth and prosperity, you have to diagnose that and you have to solve for that problem. But the Democratic Alliance is not solving for that problem. Not only that, services even in the Western Cape remain unequal. The kind of service delivery remains unequal. So, in as much as they are saying that they are fixing the issues of corruption, cadre deployment, and criminality, they're ignoring the issues of inequality, structural discrimination, and the extractive nature of the South African economy and the solutions required to fix that particular issue. Do you understand? Do you understand? So, you can't then think that your campaign is effective if you are not able to solidly address the issues that are arising. Now, the DA is polling, according to Ipsos, at 22%. I don't think that they're going to hit any 22%. I think that they may hit as low as 15%, maybe lower, because people can see that this campaign is not a good campaign. They can see that they are not connecting with the leadership. They can see that many black leaders have left the Democratic Alliance. They can see that there are alternatives to the Democratic Alliance, Action SA, Rise Mzansi, Build One South Africa, Patriotic Alliance. There are so many alternatives. And when you have so many competitors competing for the same votes, if you don't work hard and try hard to get those votes, how can you expect to win? It seems to me that the DA has accepted secretly, tacitly, and sometimes even explicitly that they're not going to have a path to 30%, 25%, and that even though they are declining, there's an opportunity for them to still occupy the corridors of power by giving the ANC a coalition. And many business publications seem to prefer this because it doesn't lead to any disruption for the next 5 years, in their opinion. And this is what it seems like the DA has accepted, that even though they are falling, they will be there to give a lifeline to the ANC. And some people are okay with that because the understanding or the thinking is then they will be able to keep an eye on the corruption and maybe to mitigate the worst manifestations of that corruption. But what happened in many countries when smaller parties gave their coalition support to a larger party is that those smaller parties never made it back. They never came back. So that in the UK, they never come back. So is this a worthwhile sacrifice? Is this the plan? What do you think, though? Do you think that I'm correct, that my analysis about the Democratic Alliance is fair, accurate? Do you think that they're running a good campaign? Do you think they're going to hit 22%? Or do you think that the own goals, the poor leadership, the lack of diversity, the perceptions around the party, that all of these things are just avalanching to the point of no return? Let's have a conversation.